Why do some people spend their whole lives measuring worth by who got the corner office, who drives the newest car, who married up? And why do they assume the quiet ones, the ones who don't play their game, somehow lost? Arya never played their game, not in high school, not now. She pulled her rental sedan into the parking lot of Jefferson High, the engine ticking as it cooled in the October night air. 10 years. A decade since she walked these halls with her head down, shoulders hunched, trying to make herself invisible. The parking lot was already half full, luxury SUVs gleaming under the streetlights, their chrome details catching every photon like they were starving for attention. She found a spot near the entrance, nothing special, just a space between two lines. As her hand reached for the ignition, blinding high beams flooded her rearview mirror. The SUV behind her lurched forward, swerving aggressively until it blocked her driver's side door completely. Bass-heavy music rattled her windows, the kind that makes your ribcage vibrate. She sat there, hands still on the wheel, pulse unchanged. Through her side mirror, she watched a guy lean out of the driver's window. Trent. She remembered him. Used to copy her calculus homework every Tuesday, never said thank you, always acted like he was doing her a favor by sitting next to her. He tossed a set of valet keys toward her windshield. They bounced off the glass with a metallic clink. "Move that scrap metal," he shouted over the music. "Real guests need to park." Arya didn't move, didn't honk, didn't roll down her window to argue. She just sat there staring straight ahead at the gym entrance, at the banner that read Class of 2015, 10 years stronger. Trent waited, his engine revving impatiently. When she still didn't react, he threw his hands up, reversed with a squeal of tires, and sped off toward the VIP section he'd probably paid extra for. She opened her door into a deep puddle of cold, stagnant mud. The water soaked through her boot instantly, the kind of wet that reaches your socks and stays there all night. First stain of the evening, but she'd worn worse. Sand, blood, hydraulic fluid, mud was nothing. At the entrance, a teenager with a clipboard stepped in front of her. He couldn't have been more than 16, probably a student volunteer, following instructions he didn't understand. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, not looking at her face, just her clothes. "Service entrance for vendors and kitchen staff is around back. This walkway is for ticket-holding alumni only." He pointed toward a dark alley where a dumpster overflowed with rotting vegetables. The smell hit her even from 20 feet away. She glanced at the sign above the main doors. "Welcome, Class of 2015. Then back at him. His clipboard, his laminated list he hadn't even checked. She didn't argue, didn't explain. Just sidestepped him with the kind of fluidity that comes from moving through tight spaces under pressure. 3 strides later, she was past him, and he was still staring at the empty spot where she'd been standing, confused by her complete lack of compliance. Inside, the gym had been transformed into a time capsule of teenage nostalgia and adult pretension. Helium balloons in blue and gold sagged slightly near the ceiling, their strings tangled. A banner stretched across the far wall, trying too hard to convince everyone that a decade had made them stronger, better, more successful. Music played low from speakers in the corner, some generic pop song from 2015 that made a few people sway nostalgically while they talked about mortgages and divorces and kids they barely saw because they worked 70-hour weeks to afford houses they were never home to enjoy. Arya wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail that hadn't seen a salon in months because it had been under a flight helmet for weeks. No jewelry, no heels. Just steel-reinforced boots that had walked terrain most of these people couldn't find on a map. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, her eyes scanning in a grid pattern, spotting familiar faces that hadn't changed much except for a few extra pounds, a few more lines around the eyes, the weight of 10 years of trying to prove something to everyone. The sign-in table sat near the entrance, manned by Belle Hart. Event coordinator, her name tag announced, like it was a title worth engraving. Belle had been prom queen, yearbook editor, the kind of girl who decided who sat where at lunch and who got invited to which parties. Now she stood there in a dress that hugged every curve, makeup flawless, nails done in a fresh manicure that probably cost more than Arya's entire outfit. Belle's smile froze when Arya approached, just for a second. Then it sharpened into something colder, meaner, like a blade catching light. "Oh, Arya," Belle said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I almost didn't recognize you, thought you might be here to help with the cleanup crew or something." A few people snickered, eager, ready to be in on the joke. Arya reached for the pen to sign in. Her hands were steady, calloused. "Just here like everyone else," she said. Her voice was calm, flat. The kind of calm that makes people nervous if they're paying attention. Belle leaned in, lowering her voice but not really, ensuring everyone heard. "Well, glad you made it. I mean, we weren't sure if you'd show. Heard things have been tough." Belle handed over a name tag, but not the laminated kind on lanyards that everyone else wore. No, she dug into a cardboard box under the table and pulled out a handwritten sticker, the red ink already smudged and fatting. She slapped it onto Arya's chest with too much force, her acrylic nails digging briefly into Arya's collarbone. "We ran out of the official ones for late RSVPs, Belle lied smoothly, even though a stack of pre-printed badges sat right there on the table, alphabetically sorted. "Didn't want to waste budget if you weren't going to show. You know how expensive card stock is. Just try not to sweat on this one or the ink will run all over that sweater." She gestured vaguely at Arya's hoodie, then wiped her hands on a sanitizer wipe like she'd touched something contaminated. A contagion of failure she needed to scrub off. But Arya didn't flinch, didn't drop her gaze, didn't give Belle even a micro-expression of hurt. She just adjusted the small radio clip to her belt, the one that looked like any old walkie-talkie to untrained eyes, and let the moment sit there, heavy and awkward, until Belle had to look away first. And in that instant, something shifted, not in the room, in Arya, a quiet understanding that these people hadn't changed at all. They were still playing the same game, still measuring worth by the same shallow metrics, still desperate to prove they were better than someone, anyone, even if it meant tearing down a girl who'd never done anything to them except exist without their permission. She took the sticker, pressed it to her chest herself, smoothing it down with one finger. Then she walked into that gym, into that crowd of people who'd spent 10 years learning nothing, and she waited. Because some things are worth waiting for. Some moments arrive exactly when they're supposed to, and some judgments come from the sky. What does it feel like to be invisible in a room full of people who once knew your name, not forgotten, worse, dismissed, erased while standing right there? Arya moved through the reunion like a current beneath still water, present but unseen. She grabbed a cup of punch from a table near the wall, the liquid too sweet, artificially red, the kind of drink that stains your teeth if you're not careful. She didn't drink it, just held it, gave her hands something to do. Around her, clusters of people swapped stories, voices rising and falling in waves of forced enthusiasm. "My promotion came through last month, finally broke 6 figures. We're thinking about getting a lake house, nothing fancy, just a little retreat. The kids are in private school now, you know how it is. Everyone trying to outdo the last person's story, everyone performing success like it was an Olympic sport and the judges were watching. But no one looked at Arya. When she approached a group near the refreshment table, they shifted just enough to close the circle. Not hostile, not obvious, just enough to make it clear she wasn't welcome. She stood there for a moment, testing it, seeing if anyone would acknowledge her. No one did. She moved on. Near the DJ booth, she recognized a few faces from her old English class. They were laughing about something, drinks in hand, leaning into each other like old times. She walked closer, close enough to hear them reminisce about senior prom, about that one teacher who fell asleep during lectures, about the time someone set off fireworks in the parking lot. One of them, a woman named Jenna, glanced up as Arya stepped into their orbit. Their eyes met for half a second. Then Jenna turned back to the group, her smile never faltering, and continued her story without missing a beat. Like Arya wasn't there. Like she was made of air. It wasn't the first time she'd felt invisible. Back in high school, she perfected the art of it, sitting in corners of the library during lunch, walking the long way to class to avoid crowded hallways, keeping her head down, her voice quiet, her existence small enough that people could forget she was even enrolled. But this wasn't high school anymore. She'd walked away from these halls and into something bigger, something real. And yet here she was, 10 years later, and nothing had changed. At least not for them. She found a spot near the bleachers, half in shadow, and watched. The DJ played another throwback song, something from their senior year that made a few people rush to the makeshift dance floor. She sipped her punch now, just a little, enough to give her mouth something to do so she didn't look as isolated as she felt. That's when Mr. Tiller approached. She recognized him instantly. History teacher. Used to give pop quizzes every Monday just to watch students squirm. He was older now, grayer, his posture slightly stooped, but that same smug expression was carved into his face like it had been there since birth. He stopped a few feet from her, hands in his pockets, rocking back on his heels. "Aria," he said, like he was confirming her existence, like he needed proof she was real. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd moved away, disappeared, whatever." She nodded. "Been away, just visiting." He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who'd already decided what your life looked like and was pleased with their assessment. "So what have you been up to? Still figuring things out? I remember you were always a bit lost, never quite sure what you wanted." His words hung there, a subtle knife wrapped in false concern. She could have corrected him, could have told him exactly what she'd been doing, but she didn't, just shrugged. "Working, staying busy." "Good, good," he said, nodding like he'd confirmed something. "Important to have direction. Can't just drift through life, you know. Some people figure it out late, but they figure it out." And then he walked away, leaving her standing there with his judgment still hanging in the air like smoke. But she wasn't angry. Anger would have meant she cared what he thought. And she didn't, not anymore. Maybe she used to. Maybe back in high school when his words could make her doubt herself, make her wonder if she really was lost, if she really was as directionless as he implied. But not now. Now she knew what she was, what she'd become. And his opinion was just noise, background static, irrelevant frequency. She glanced down at the radio on her belt. It had been silent so far, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way. Because tonight wasn't just a reunion. It was a standby shift, active duty. She'd come here straight from base, still technically on call, ready to respond if the signal came through. Most people here thought she was unemployed, directionless, still figuring things out. They had no idea she'd been in the cockpit of an AH-64 Apache 48 hours ago, running live-fire drills in conditions that would make most of them vomit from stress. They had no idea she held a security clearance higher than some senators. They had no idea that the radio on her belt was connected to a network that spanned continents, that one burst of static could pull her out of this gym and into the kind of situation where hesitation meant death. She looked around the gym again, at the balloons, at the punch bowl, at the people laughing and posing for photos, desperate to prove that 10 years had made them matter, and she realized something. They were still scared, still trying to fill the same holes they'd had back in high school, just with bigger houses and fancier cars and more expensive clothes, still measuring their worth by how much better they were than someone else, still needing someone to look down on so they could feel elevated. And tonight she was it. The girl who didn't make it, the girl who stayed small, the girl they could use as a reference point to prove they'd climbed higher, except they were wrong. And soon they'd know it. Because the thing about being underestimated is this: it gives you room to move, to prepare, to position yourself so that when the moment comes, when the truth lands, it lands with the force of something they never saw coming. She adjusted her radio again. Any minute now, any second, and when it came, she wouldn't have to say a word. Some truths announce themselves. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave and not known it yet? Not with shovels, with words, with laughter, with the kind of cruelty that feels good in the moment but echoes forever after. The night wore on and the crowd grew louder, emboldened by cheap wine and cheaper beer. Inhibitions lowered. Old hierarchies reasserted themselves. The popular kids, now popular adults, gathered near the center of the gym like they owned it. Cadden Raoul stood in the middle of them, arms crossed, grin wide, holding court like he always had. Star quarterback back in the day. Now some mid-level manager at a tech firm, but he wore his high school glory like a crown that hadn't tarnished. He spotted Arya near the bleachers, standing alone, and something lit up in his eyes, an opportunity. A chance to remind everyone who he was by reminding her who she wasn't. He nudged the guy next to him, whispered something, and they both laughed. Then he walked toward her, his entourage following like ducklings in expensive shoes. Arya saw them coming. Didn't move. Just stood there, cup still in hand, expression neutral, waiting. Cadden stopped a few feet away, close enough to invade her space but not quite touching. "Arya," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You made it. Honestly, I'm surprised. Figured you'd skip this, avoid the whole awkward where are you now conversation." She looked at him, didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked. "Why would it be awkward?" he laughed, glancing back at his friends for support. They obliged, chuckling on cue. "I mean, come on, we all saw your Facebook, or lack thereof. No updates, no job announcements, no fancy trips, just silence." He leaned in a little, his voice dropping to a stage whisper everyone could still hear. "It's okay to admit you're struggling. We've all been there. Well, not all of us, but you know what I mean." One of his friends, a guy named Derek, piped up. "Seriously though, what do you do now? Still job hunting?" Arya sipped her punch, taking her time. "I work." "Doing what?" Derek pressed, grinning like he already knew the punchline. She shrugged. "Can't really talk about it." That got a big laugh. Cadden slapped his knee, shaking his head. "Oh man, that's the line, huh? Can't talk about it." Classic, like you're some secret agent or something. Another guy chimed in. "Maybe she's in witness protection. Or maybe she's just unemployed and doesn't want to admit it." The group erupted in laughter, feeding off each other's energy, each one trying to land the next zinger. Belle appeared at the edge of the circle, drink in hand, her smile sharp and delighted. "Oh, are we catching up with Arya? I love this. It's so brave of her to come here knowing she doesn't have much to share." Jenna joined in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Honestly, Arya, if you need help, we could set up a GoFundMe or something. We're all doing well, so we don't mind chipping in for someone who's having a hard time." Arya stood there, surrounded, her face still calm, still unreadable. Inside, nothing stirred. No anger, no hurt, just a quiet awareness that they were making a mistake. A big one, and they had no idea. Cadden leaned back, arms crossed again, that same practiced grin. "Seriously though, what happened to you? You just disappeared. No LinkedIn, no career, no nothing. Did you just give up?" "Maybe she's working at a gas station," someone suggested. "Or waiting tables," another added. "No shame in that," Cadden said, his tone patronizing. "Honest work. But come on, Arya, you had to know this would be hard, coming back here with nothing to show." The circle tightened, more people gathering, drawn by the spectacle. Some looked uncomfortable, but they didn't step in, didn't defend her, just watched, complicit in their silence. And then Cadden delivered what he thought was the final blow. He leaned in close, his voice cutting through the noise, sharp and deliberate. "You're still the class loser. No one's waiting for you." The words hung in the air, heavy, meant to crush. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her reaction, waiting for her to crumble, to shrink, to confirm what they'd always believed about her. But she didn't. She just stood there, her expression unchanged, and adjusted the radio on her belt. That's when it crackled. A sharp burst of static, cutting through the music, the laughter, the noise. A coded signal, a specific frequency, a message that most people in this room wouldn't recognize if their lives depended on it, but Arya did. Her eyes flicked down to the radio for a fraction of a second, then back up to Cadden, and for the first time that night she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, knowing curve at the corner of her mouth, like she just heard the punchline to a joke only she understood. Cadden frowned, confused. "What's so funny?" She didn't answer. Just tilted her head slightly, listening. And then the floor trembled, just a little at first, a vibration that made the punch in her cup ripple. People paused, confused, looking around. "What was that?" someone asked. Another person pointed toward the window. "Did you feel that?" The vibration came again, stronger this time, rattling the bleachers, shaking the balloons, making the old gym groan. And then they heard it. A low, distant rumble, growing louder, deeper, building like distant thunder rolling in from a storm they hadn't seen coming. Arya set her cup down on a nearby table, straightened up, and waited, because what was coming next no one expected. What does real power sound like? Not the kind you brag about at reunions, the kind that makes the ground shake. The rumble grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through the chests of everyone standing in that gym. It wasn't an earthquake, it wasn't thunder, it was something else entirely, something mechanical, something deliberate. People started moving toward the windows, confused, curious, a little nervous. "Is that a helicopter?" someone asked. "Sounds close," another said. Cadden was still standing there, his grin starting to falter, looking at Arya like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. She hadn't moved, hadn't panicked, just stood there calm like she'd been expecting this. The radio on her belt crackled again, another burst of static, and she reached down to key the mic. Her voice was low, professional, clipped. "Copy, position confirmed, stand by." People around her stopped, turned, stared. "Wait, what?" Bell said, her voice rising in confusion. "Who are you talking to?" Arya didn't answer. She just walked toward the gym entrance, her boots echoing on the hardwood floor, cutting through the noise. The crowd parted without realizing they were doing it, instinct telling them to move, to get out of the way of whatever was happening. Outside, the rumble had become a roar, the deep, unmistakable thrum of rotor blades cutting through the night air. Massive ones, close ones. Everyone poured out of the gym, spilling into the parking lot, craning their necks toward the sky. And there it was. Descending from the darkness, spotlights blazing, an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter dropping lower and lower, its twin engines screaming, its rotors kicking up dust and debris and terror in equal measure. The downdraft hit like a physical force, bending trees, scattering balloons that had escaped from inside, sending napkins and cups flying across the parking lot like shrapnel. People stumbled back, hands over their faces, shielding themselves from the wind and noise. Car alarms started blaring. Someone screamed. The Apache hovered just above the ground, 10 feet up, its landing gear extending, its weapons pylons visible in the harsh glare of the spotlights. Twin Hellfire missiles. Rocket pods. A 30 chain gun slung beneath the nose, pointed at nothing but looking like it could point at anything. This wasn't a medical helicopter. This wasn't a news chopper. This was a weapon, a war machine, and it was here, for her. Arya walked forward, calm, steady, like she was walking to her car, not toward a multi-million-dollar military aircraft that most people only saw in movies or war footage. She reached up to key her radio again, speaking into it, her voice lost in the roar but her lips moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. The Apache touched down, the skids settling onto the pavement with a metallic thunk that echoed even over the engine noise. The canopy slid open and the pilot in the front seat gave Arya a thumbs up. She returned it. Then she turned around, facing the crowd that had gathered, the same people who'd mocked her minutes ago, who'd called her a loser, who'd told her she had nothing. They stood there, frozen, faces pale, eyes wide, mouths open. Cadden was at the front of the group, his confident grin completely gone, replaced with something that looked like shock and fear. His hands were shaking. Belle stood next to him, her expensive dress covered in dust, her hair whipped into chaos by the rotor wash, her face slack with disbelief. Mr. Tiller was there too, his smug expression shattered, staring at the helicopter like it had materialized from another dimension. Arya didn't say anything at first, just stood there letting them absorb it, letting them process what they were seeing, what they'd missed, who she actually was. Then she spoke, her voice cutting through the noise with the kind of authority that doesn't need to be loud. "I fly this." She gestured to the Apache behind her, its rotors still spinning, its engine still roaring. "Warrant Officer Arya Chen, United States Army, attack helicopter pilot. I've been flying combat missions for the last 6 years. Deployments in 3 combat zones, over 800 flight hours. I don't talk about it because it's classified. I don't post about it because operational security matters more than social media. And I came here tonight straight from a standby shift because I thought maybe, after 10 years, people might have grown up." She paused, letting that sink in. "I was wrong." Cadden tried to speak, his mouth opening, but nothing came out. Derek, the guy who joked about her being unemployed, took a step back, his face pale. Jenna, who'd suggested the GoFundMe, looked like she wanted to disappear into the pavement. Belle just stood there, her drink still in her hand, the glass trembling. Arya turned back toward the Apache, The pilot was watching, waiting, and she gave another hand signal. The co-pilot gunner in the back seat leaned out slightly, his helmet visor down, his presence adding another layer of intimidation. She walked to the side of the helicopter, her hand resting on the fuselage like it was an extension of herself. Then she looked back at the crowd one more time. "This is what I do. This is who I am. And you know what? I don't need your validation. I don't need your approval. I never did." She climbed up onto the skid, her movements smooth, practiced, and paused before getting into the cockpit. "Enjoy the rest of your reunion." Then she was inside, the canopy sliding shut, the engines ramping up, the rotors spinning faster. The Apache lifted off, rising straight up, 20 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet, until it was just a silhouette against the night sky, its spotlights cutting through the darkness like judgment. And then it banked hard, the nose dipping, and it was gone, disappearing into the black, the sound fading until all that was left was the ringing silence and the wreckage of their assumptions. When the dust settles, what's left? Not just debris, truth. And truth has a way of hunting down everyone who tried to bury it. The crowd stood there in the parking lot, staring at the empty sky, their faces still covered in dust, their ears still ringing from the rotor wash. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just stood there, processing what had just happened, trying to reconcile the girl they remembered, the girl they'd mocked, with the woman who just climbed into an attack helicopter and flown away like it was nothing. Cadden's hands were still shaking. He looked down at them, confused, like they belonged to someone else. His friends, the ones who'd laughed with him, who'd joined in on the mockery, were staring at him now. Not with camaraderie, with something else. Blame, accusation. He'd led them into this. He'd been the one to go after her. And now they were all standing here looking like fools while she was gone. Belle stumbled backward, her heel catching on a crack in the pavement. She caught herself, but barely, and when she looked up, people were staring at her too, judging her. The same way she'd judged others for years. Jenna pulled out her phone, hands trembling, already seeing the damage this was going to do. Someone had filmed it. Of course they had, multiple people, the whole thing, her joke about the GoFundMe, Cadden's insult, the Apache descending, Arya's calm, cutting response. It was already uploading, already spreading, already viral. Inside the gym, Mr. Tiller sat down heavily on the bleachers, his legs too weak to hold him. He'd called her lost, directionless, told her some people figure it out late, and she'd been a combat pilot for 6 years, while he'd been here teaching the same classes, giving the same lectures, living the same small life. The principal of the school, who'd been inside handling logistics, walked out and stopped dead when he saw the scene. The scattered debris, the dazed crowd. The look of absolute shock on everyone's faces. "What happened?" he asked. Nobody answered. They couldn't. How do you explain that the girl you dismissed, the girl you wrote off, just proved she was more than any of you ever were? How do you put that into words? The night ended not with celebration but with silence. People left quickly, avoiding eye contact, slipping into their cars and driving away without saying goodbye. The reunion, the event that was supposed to prove how far they'd all come, had become a monument to how little they'd grown. In the days that followed, the video exploded. It wasn't just local, it went national. Millions of views, comments pouring in by the thousands, most of them brutal. They mocked a combat pilot and got what they deserved. Imagine being so insecure you bully someone who literally protects your freedom. That Apache landing was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. The faces in the video were easy to identify, tagged, named, exposed. Cadden's boss saw it. Called him into the office on Monday morning. "We can't have this representing our brand," they said. "We can't have someone who publicly mocks a service member associated with our company." He was fired, just like that. His swagger gone, his reputation ruined. Forced to start over at a smaller firm where nobody knew him, where his high school glory meant nothing. Belle's business imploded. The event planning clients she'd worked so hard to build saw the video, saw her cruelty. Saw the way she treated Arya at the door, the handwritten name tag, the sanitizer wipe. Sponsors pulled out. Weddings were canceled. Her social media, once a curated showcase of success, became a war zone of criticism. She tried to apologize, posting a tearful video claiming it was all out of context, that she and Arya had been close friends. But the internet never forgets. Someone dug up old yearbook photos showing Belle and her clique tormenting Arya in the hallways. The caption read, "They were mean then, they're mean now. Karma just finally showed up with rockets." The video got 3 million views in 48 hours. Belle's biggest client, a high-profile wedding, dropped her the next morning. "We don't want bad energy," the bride said. Mr. Tiller faced backlash from the school board. Parents complained. How could a teacher who bullied a former student, a decorated service member, still be employed? He was given an early retirement package, not because they wanted to, because they had to. He spent his days alone in a quiet house, clippings of the story mocked on the fridge by family members who couldn't believe what he'd done. Jenna's real estate business collapsed under a flood of one-star reviews. Lack of character, bullying behavior. Would never trust her. She had to shut down her business page within 2 days. Derek, who'd offered Arya $20 to be his driver, found his car keyed a week later. Scratched into the paint weren't curse words, just coordinates. The exact location of the reunion. He couldn't prove who did it, and the police, having seen the viral video, took his report with noticeable lack of enthusiasm. His insurance premiums skyrocketed. He stopped wearing his varsity jacket. It felt like a costume for a child. Todd, the MC who'd mocked her unemployment, lost his career. His tech company had been bidding on a massive defense contract. During final vetting, the client saw the video, saw him publicly humiliating a decorated aviation officer. The contract was pulled immediately. He was fired not for incompetence, but for being a liability. His stock options, his corner office, his reputation, all gone, all because he wanted a cheap laugh. And then came the final blow. A letter arrived at the reunion committee chairman's office, official Department of Defense letterhead, an invoice for landing zone obstruction, for foreign object debris hazard removal, for specialized engine filters required after the Apache ingested balloons and confetti from the reunion. The cost was staggering, more than the entire budget of the event. Belle and the committee were personally liable. The alumni fund was drained. They had to pay out of pocket. A financial crater that would follow them for years. Every time they looked at their bank accounts, they'd remember Arya, remember what they'd done, remember what it cost. The high school received an anonymous donation a month later, enough to renovate the science labs and library, the places where Arya had hidden during her years of torment. The only condition: remove the class of 2015 plaque from the entrance hall. Replace it with a mural dedicated to quiet resilience. The principal agreed immediately. When Cadden and Bell drove by and saw workers prying their class year off the brick, they realized the truth. They hadn't just been embarrassed. They'd been erased. Their legacy of 10 years stronger was in the dumpster, replaced by the shadow of the girl they tried to break. What does vindication feel like when you don't need it anymore? When you've already moved past the people who tried to hold you down? Arya returned to base 3 hours after she left the reunion. The Apache was secured in the hangar, post-flight checks completed, maintenance logs signed. She filed her reports, attended debriefing, and went back to her quarters like it was any other night. Because for her, it was. The reunion had been a detour, a brief stop in a place that didn't matter anymore. The people there, the ones who'd measured their worth by corner offices and luxury cars and social media posts, they'd spent 10 years building lives on foundations of sand, trying to prove they were better than someone, anyone, so they could feel like they'd made it. But Arya hadn't been trying to prove anything. She'd been busy becoming someone who didn't need their approval. Someone who'd found worth in service, in skill, in the kind of work that doesn't fit neatly into a LinkedIn profile or a Facebook post. She'd learned to fly one of the most complex weapons systems ever built, mastered the physics of rotor dynamics, the art of close air support, the discipline of operating under pressure where mistakes meant lives lost. She deployed to places where the only thing between chaos and order was her and her crew. And she'd done it all while they were arguing about parking spaces and name tags, and who got invited to which parties. The video kept spreading. She didn't watch it, didn't need to. Her commanding officer called her into his office 2 days after the reunion, not to reprimand her but to laugh. "You know you're famous now, right?" he said, shaking his head. That video's got like 10 million views. People are calling you a hero, she shrugged. Just did my job, sir. Landing an Apache at a high school reunion isn't exactly standard procedure, warrant officer. I was on standby, sir. The signal came through. I responded. He leaned back in his chair, grinning. Technically correct, the best kind of correct. Just next time maybe choose a less dramatic LZ. I'll take that under advisement, sir. He nodded, still smiling. Dismissed, and Chen, good work. She left his office and went back to training, back to drills, back to the work that mattered, because that's the thing about real purpose. It doesn't need an audience, doesn't need validation, it just is. The messages started coming in. Old classmates who hadn't said a word at the reunion suddenly wanted to reconnect. Apologies, explanations, justifications. She read a few, then stopped. What was the point? They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. Sorry their cruelty went viral. Sorry it cost them their reputations and their jobs. But they weren't sorry for who they were, for the kind of people who needed to tear someone down to feel elevated. She didn't respond. Didn't block them either. Just let the messages sit there unread, irrelevant. One message stood out, though, from a girl named Sarah. They'd been in biology together, never really talked much, but Sarah had always been kind in a quiet way. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you at the reunion, the message said. I wanted to, but I didn't. That was wrong. You deserved better. You always did. Aria read it twice, then typed back, thank you, that means something. And it did. Because real apologies, the ones that come from people who actually grew, they carry weight. They matter. The rest was just noise. Past. The internet moved on to the next viral story, the next scandal, the next thing to be outraged about. The reunion video faded from trending lists, became a footnote, a story people remembered when someone mentioned karma or bullies or helicopters. But the consequences didn't fade. Cadden was still rebuilding his career. Belle was still trying to salvage her business. Mr. Tiller was still retired, his legacy tarnished. And Aria, she was promoted, not because of the video. Because of her performance, her flight hours, her evaluations, her skill. She made Chief Warrant Officer 3, a rank earned through competence, not spectacle. Her new assignment took her overseas again, back to places where the work was hard and the stakes were real, and she was grateful for it. Grateful to be away from the noise, the pettiness, the shallow metrics of worth that people clung to like life preservers in a storm. She flew missions, trained new pilots, mentored younger warrant officers who reminded her of herself, the ones who were quiet, overlooked, underestimated. She told them, don't let anyone make you small. Find your purpose, master your craft, and when they finally see what you are, you won't need to say a word. The work speaks for itself. One night, 6 months after the reunion, she was sitting in the pilot's lounge on base, drinking coffee, reading a flight manual. Another pilot, a guy named Tors, walked in, saw her, and stopped. Wait, you're that pilot from the reunion video? She looked up, nodded once. Yeah, dude, that was legendary, absolutely legendary. She smiled a little. It was just a response to a standby signal. Still, best LZ I've ever seen, and the look on those people's faces, priceless. She went back to her manual. Tors grabbed his own coffee, sat down across from her. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did it feel good proving them wrong like that? She thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. No, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel bad either. It just was. They spent 10 years thinking I was nothing, and they were wrong, but their opinion never mattered in the first place. So proving them wrong didn't change anything for me, just for them. Tors nodded slowly, processing. That's a hell of a perspective. It's the only one that matters, she said. If you build your worth on what other people think, you'll spend your whole life chasing their approval. But if you build it on what you actually do, on the work itself, you don't need their validation. You already know what you are. He raised his coffee cup. To knowing what you are. She clinked her cup against his. To knowing what you are. And that was the real lesson. Not that bullies get what's coming. Not that karma finds everyone eventually, but that the people who matter, the ones who build their lives on something real, something solid, they don't need moments of vindication, because they've already moved past the need for it. They've already become more than the opinions of people who never saw them clearly in the first place. Aria flew the next morning. Dawn patrol. The sky was clear, the controls responsive, the mission straightforward. She guided the Apache through its flight path with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. Below her, the world was small. Towns and roads and people living their lives, building their legacies, measuring their worth. And up here, above it all, she was free. Free from their judgments, free from their games, free to be exactly what she'd worked so hard to become. A pilot, a soldier, a woman who didn't need permission to exist. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when the moment comes, when the truth lands, it lands with the force of something they never saw coming. Not because you needed to prove them wrong, but because you were too busy becoming right.